Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're really peeling back the layers on a crucial part of American governance, the House Oversight Committee. And our way into this is a really interesting interview with the new ranking member, Robert Garcia. It's from a YouTube video uploaded by Brian Tyler Cohen.
Right. And our mission for you today is, well, to pull out Garcia's top priorities, understand his strategy, in what's a pretty challenging role,
Yeah.
and figure out what his leadership might mean for government oversight going forward. Basically, we want you to get the key takeaways and the bigger picture implications pretty quickly.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack his pretty bold vision, look at the specific issues he's really zeroing in on, and talk about how exactly he thinks he can navigate things, operating from that minority position.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into it.
Sounds good.
So Robert Garcia getting this ranking member spot, it's quite something, especially since he's, relatively new to Congress, a sophomore member.
It really is.
He sounds genuinely grateful for the chance, and you can really hear the passion he has for the committee's work. He even connects it back to figures like Jamie Raskin.
Yeah, who he calls a hero for protecting the Constitution. It sets a certain tone.
Definitely.
And what's really fascinating, and he's crystal clear about this, his absolute #1 priority is holding Donald Trump and the Trump family accountable for their crimes and corruption. That's a direct quote.
Wow, okay, straight out of the gate.
Straight out of this. Garcia firmly believes, and he states this very strongly, that the Trump administration was the most corrupt in our history. He argues no other modern administration has sort of impacted agencies or the public with that level of alleged corruption.
And he doesn't just leave it there as a general statement, right? He gives specifics.
Oh, yeah. He lists quite a few examples, he says, illustrate this. There's the $400 million plane, he implies. The purchase was, let's say, questionable. Then he mentions this coin and crypto scheme, which he describes pretty vividly as essentially a bank account for foreign money just flowing in. He also brings up alleged investments in Trump hotel properties, in places around the world where the U.S. is trying to do diplomacy.
Right. Potential conflicts of interest there.
Exactly. And the Kushner deal with Saudi Arabia after they left the White House. That gets mentioned too.
A frequently cited one.
And just more broadly, the whole practice of selling Trump-branded products, his bottom line, and he says this directly, presidents should not be profiting off the White House.
So, quite a list.
It is. And from Garcia's viewpoint, all these things basically turn the White House into, his words again, an ATM for himself and his family. An
ATM. That's a strong image.
Very. And he really frames it by saying, look, if President Obama or President Biden had done just one of these things, and he throws out some pretty colorful hypothetical.
Like what?
Like starting a meme coin where the money gets funneled back into his pocket, or buying a $400 million plane from a state sponsor of terrorism country, or even, selling Bibles with his signature on them.
Okay.
He says just one of those would be an international scandal. So the insight here is really how Garcia sees these alleged actions not as small things, but as fundamental abuses needing the committee's full attention.
Right. That focus on accountability for past actions is really striking. But you mentioned it's not all backward-looking. He does have a forward agenda, too.
Yes, absolutely. Beyond dealing with past allegations, Garcia signals a pretty significant focus on looking at corporate power now.
Interesting.
He talks about taking on powerful interests and large corporations that he says are looking right now at scamming the American public. And he specifically names Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, okay.
Yeah.
That's definitely contemporary.
It is. And it's not just about grabbing headlines, It seems to highlight this growing political focus on, the influence and potential downsides of these huge tech companies and how they affect regular people. That feels very forward-looking for oversight.
And government reform, too.
Yes, that's the other piece. He outlines a broader government reform agenda, making government more efficient, more effective, using technology and innovation to improve services. And crucially, he says, uplifting federal workers.
Okay, so it's pretty wide scope. Accountability for the past, corporate oversight now, and government reform for the future.
That's the picture he paints.
So what does this all boil down to for, the committee's immediate day-to-day focus? Beyond the big ideas, what are the first steps?
That's the key question, right? Talk is one thing. Garcia actually points to two very concrete, immediate priorities.
Okay.
First, he says, build the best team possible. Staff, committee members, get the right people in place.
Makes sense.
And then number two, and he says this is most important, to expose the just egregious corruption that is happening across every agency in government. And how? By talking about Donald Trump's corruption every single day.
Every single day. So the strategy is basically constant public pressure, keep it in the headlines.
That seems to be exactly the plan. Very assertive.
Which, okay, leads to the next obvious challenge. Being assertive is one thing, but doing it from the minority in the House,
Yeah.
that's tough. How does he plan to actually wield power or, make an impact from that position?
Right, the practicality. Well, he outlines a strategy of basically being fearless, his word. Fearless in taking on some of the kind of loudest voices in the MAGA universe.
Names.
Oh, yeah. He specifically mentions Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nancy Mace and Jim Jordan. And he accuses them, point blank, of telling lies to distort what we as Democrats are trying to do.
So direct confrontation, no shying away from the political fight.
Doesn't sound like it. He seems ready for it.
And he believes they can still achieve things from the minority.
He asserts that, yes, he says even in the minority, the committees still have the power to do investigations and also to try to move forward legislation. Maybe not pass it easily, but push it.
And push back, too, presumably.
Definitely. He sees a critical role in pushing back against hearings led by the majority Republicans. He mentions things like what he calls crazy Doge hearings, attempts to impeach President Biden, or promoting ideas with Elon Musk. So using the minority position as a platform for counter-messaging is key.
Okay, so investigations, trying for legislation, and counter-messaging.
And he puts a lot of faith in the newer members on the committee. He lists people like Maxwell Frost and Jasmine Crockett and Greg Cesar and Summer Lee and Yasim Sari and Dave Min.
A lot of those newer faces, yeah.
Exactly. He describes them as folks who are committed to exposing the truth and not afraid to punch back. So you see this sort of generational element, maybe bringing in members who are perhaps more digitally savvy and ready for that kind of direct engagement.
That leads perfectly into something else he really stresses, doesn't it? The whole messaging focus.
Yes. This is critical to his approach. He basically says, look, a lot of what happens in government almost doesn't matter if nobody knows.
That's a pretty stark assessment of Washington.
It is. And it suggests he's thinking beyond just, conducting the investigation. He's thinking about how you deliver the findings, how you make oversight actually register with people.
So how does he plan to do that differently?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. He talks about building a committee that's forward-looking in its communication, using it to its best ability, and crucially, reaching people where they are, meaning where they are consuming their information. He explicitly cites YouTube and what they're watching on their phones.
So social media, video content, not just press releases.
Exactly. The goal, he says, is to produce content that is relatable and that people can understand. Taking these, potentially complex investigations and making them mean something beyond just like a letter that goes out on committee letterhead.
That feels like a significant shift, moving beyond the traditional ways committees communicate.
I think it is. It suggests a real reevaluation of how Congress connects with the public, maybe even, trying to democratize access to what these oversight committees are actually finding out.
And he promises tangible changes.
He does. He says, quote, "In the months ahead, you're going to see this committee communicate in places and in ways that it hasn't before." Moving past just, posting a JPEG of some statement onto Twitter.
Okay, so expect more video, more social native content, perhaps?
That seems to be the implication, a real understanding of the modern media landscape.
Now, Garcia also touches on his own position, right? Being elected ranking member as a sophomore, which is unusual.
Very unusual. He says he's the first ranking member in over 100 years to be elected as a sophomore.
Wow. How does he interpret that?
He sees it as a sign that the Democratic caucus is trying to expand the tent, bring in newer voices to the leadership table, and get different perspectives.
So a conscious effort to diversify leadership, maybe generationally too.
That's how he frames it. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Garcia talks about oversight being one of the most important committees in the Congress.
Because it investigates the executive branch and corporations?
Exactly. It handles the main investigations of both the executive branch and corporate power. He sees how the committees work, and crucially, its messaging is going to resonate and build the larger message for the country and for the party.
So the committee isn't just doing investigations in a vacuum, it's actively shaping the narrative.
That's clearly his view. It becomes a key messaging platform, especially with his focus on those younger, possibly more media-savvy members he mentioned.
And he plans to use that platform, that spotlight as he calls it, to hammer home the message about Trump's alleged corruption.
Right, and also the corruption of some of these large corporations that are ripping off the American people.
But he also mentions wanting to do some really good things too, using the talents of members like Summer Lee and Max Frost. So it's not just about attacking.
Apparently not. He suggests a balance, using the platform for both accountability and perhaps some proactive policy or reform ideas driven by these members.
Okay. Now, there's another interesting concept he brings up, asymmetry. What does he mean by that in the political context?
Ah, yes, the asymmetry point. This raises a really important question, I think, about how politics functions right now. Garcia notes that Democrats, in his view, often look for common ground, try to act in a bipartisan fashion.
Okay. The traditional approach.
Right. But he believes the other side, the Republicans he's confronting, are not coming in looking to work in a bipartisan fashion. He thinks they're coming in to basically give Donald Trump the green light to traffic in the overt corruption and to consolidate more power for themselves.
So he sees a fundamental difference in approach, where one side wants bipartisanship and the other, in his view, doesn't play by those rules.
That's exactly his assessment. This perceived imbalance, this asymmetry, really seems to frame his entire, aggressive, confrontational approach to oversight. It raises the question, how do you function if you think the other side has already laid down their arms, so to speak, when it comes to traditional cooperation?
Yeah, that's a deep question about the state of politics today.
Yeah.
And it explains why he positions himself the way he does.
Absolutely. He wraps up by explicitly calling himself a fighter, says he's fearless and not a shrinking violet.
He even brings up examples.
He does. He shares anecdotes about Donald Trump's Justice Department apparently going after him and Nancy Mace trying to get him censured. He uses these to say, look, I've been through fights before.
So he's signaling that he brings that same energy, that same willingness to fight directly into this ranking member role.
Precisely. Positioning the committee to be absolutely central to the argument on Donald Trump's corruption. It's a clear statement of intent, setting a really high bar for what we should expect to see.
Okay, so we've just taken a pretty deep dive there into Robert Garcia's vision for the House Oversight Committee.
Right.
We've explored his really comprehensive approach, looking back at alleged past corruption, looking forward to government reform and corporate oversight.
And all powered by these really innovative, modern communication strategies he's planning.
All right.
It's definitely an ambitious vision, no doubt about that. Especially that emphasis on digital engagement, on reaching people online, and bringing those newer voices right to the forefront of oversight work.
Yeah, it reflects that idea you mentioned earlier, that knowledge needs to be understood and applied to be valuable. Seems he thinks that applies doubly for government accountability.
So thinking about all this, Garcia is really committed to using YouTube phones, these modern digital spaces, to get complex investigations out there. It makes you wonder, right? How might this fundamental shift in how congressional oversight actually reaches the public? How might that ultimately impact civic engagement? Or even the wider political discourse? What really stood out to you in all this about the future of accountability in Washington?